It's the Gerald Finegrooves podcast. The following is a work of satire and is not to be taken seriously. Viewer discretion advised. Worker, and this is Talkie Talk, a podcast program where people come together and talk about things they were typing about on the internet. Tonight we're talking about identity, gender, and other things that will no doubt have my podcast banned from wide rotation. My guests are George Fenderson, former professor of psychology at the University of Yellowknife. He's here to promote his new book, 12 Steps to Stop Being a Little Baby and Accepting Society's Punishment for You. His controversial ideas recently caused a small gender-based riot at a bookstore in southern New Jersey.
That's not exactly how I remember.
Oh my God, do you ever shut up? I'm so sick of you.
Thanks for treating me in the manner into which I am
My
accustomed.
pleasure. To debate him is beloved Detroit public access TV puppet Gary the Flea that identifies as a bee. Thanks for coming, Gary.
You better believe it's a pleasure to be here, Mike.
Well, isn't that typical of left-wing, so-called education?
George, I still have words to say. It's in my contract to say words here.
About your lack of skills as an interviewer on a higher traffic podcast.
Your threat isn't all that scary. So many people do that after visiting this podcast that it's practically a genre. Anyways, on to our discussion. Sexual identity. It has been in the news a lot recently with the passing of new federal laws in Canada recognizing various people and their various genitals being able to identify as other people with different genitals and their preferred pronouns, or whatever. To some, this legislation has made ordinary day-to-day conversations deadly minefields, endlessly trying not to upset your friends at dinner parties by misassigning reproductive giblets when you ask them to pass the potato salad. And yet to members of the trans community, the legislation is a victory. It is the end of a long march to freedom from oppression, and a recognition of their right to exist. George, you very famously had a run-in with students regarding these issues.
Well, the thing about that is I have the look of a predatory omnivore, like a weasel, and people my whole life have noticed my form, which whenever you communicate at a man the way these folks did, there's always the threat of physical violence, and they inherently cover the ovaries, knowing full well that I'm constantly sniffing out eggs. That's how I'm perceived by this communist, radical, mostly herbivore youth that have been misraised by a society that doesn't care. And when I called the individual in the cornrows a ma'am, it was because I could sense immediately that she was... and people are scared to
What
talk
are you
about
talking
gender now
about?
because of
Gary
the
the
laws you
Bee,
mentioned
your
earlier.
rebuttal.
I just want the boys and girls at home to always remember to be themselves.
Forgive me for being critical of the people over at Henson Studios, but I thought you were a flea that wants to be a bee.
I just want that honey.
That's an oddly sexual response.
Hey, there are probably kids listening right now. I'm literally talking about the confection.
This illustrates my point perfectly. They say he's a flea, but he mirrors a well-known insect, the beesh robber fly, which rubs up against actual bees to get their scent, and steals food from them, and they actually eat the bees' babies for their survival. They are parasites.
No, I'm a hard-working bee.
So you'd have our kids joining a commune where they exchange favors for coital gratification.
No, I'm a children's entertainer teaching kids tolerance, you smug hotel lobby boy. You're known to our community. Only therapist on the East Coast that offers happy endings.
Are you being tolerant right now? I wonder if your message isn't getting lost a little with the metaphor.
Hey, this flea has a stinger, pal.
That has no basis in science.
George, stop harassing Gary.
My omnivorous fan base is going to love re-editing this to make you seem even more stupid tomorrow, Mike.
Trust me, that's impossible. Let the puppet talk.
To which of us are you referring?
The person with a hand up their ass.
You're going to have to be more specific.
The bee.
Well, I think identity is an individual pursuit. I feel like I'm born a bee. It doesn't affect George that I am a bee. It doesn't change anything within bee society.
But you aren't a bee, you're a flea, and transgendered people need to realize that they aren't people, and women need to realize that they belong in the kitchen, making me a goddamn sandwich and rearing all the children I want to make. That's the ugly truth about society, and if it were up to me, I would send everyone that is single into a monogamous marriage camp where they are forced to procreate and raise their damn kids. It would be so much better. The fact that you are a flea trying to be a bee as a metaphor for transgender people getting rights, this is an absolute representation of what is wrong with our society.
You've made my point for me, haven't you? When you say if it were up to you, it's not up to you whether or not I'm a bee or a flea. It's up to me, the individual.
It's really hard to follow with the metaphor, but for the case of argument, let's say I'm a bee and you fly up to me and waggle your butt, and I notice your dance isn't quite right. I'm not like dancing with other bees like so many Hamilton nightclubs, and I call you a flea.
Did you just assume my species? I'm telling the queen.
That's the behavior that is damaging to our society. It's the coward's motivation. You know, I tell people to just behave normally and that they are a group of fascist deviants trying to cut my dick off, and I'm always surprised when they get upset with me. You just want to be someone else because you couldn't handle it on a dog's rear end with the other fleas. Transgender people couldn't handle it within the power structure of our society, so they would kill the part of them that makes them who they are.
I don't think you've actually heard my backstory. I was born in the hive. I've always contributed to the hive, and some of the other bees don't accept me as one of their own, even though I get all the pollen of a bee. Even though I believe in myself, some of the bees tell me I shouldn't get the same share of the honey as an actual bee. Even though I work 10 times as hard, you're one of those predatory bees, George. Telling me that a flea, even a flea contributing to our society, isn't a bee. Is that who you are?
I don't think the average kid in this culture is going to understand this metaphor. I don't like that question. You are misconstruing identity for your writer's room's politics and misconstruing the concept of identity as it relates to belonging to a collective. There has to be a power structure, and yes, that has some inherent problems. A certain group of people don't get the same as another, but that's how society has worked for millennia. If there weren't people at the top throwing down scraps and bullying those beneath them, why would any of you fleas try to be bees? I'm not going to recognize you as a bee because I have a set of eyes and I know what you are.
You have to recognize me as a bee or the queen will sting you.
That's not a reasonable response. I am the queen. I'm the whole damn royal family. Learn your place, you bee-ish robber fly. I am God. I will hurl my thunderbolts from Olympus and crush all of you, for I am man.
Oh, the circuit to my ass has been connected. That means, yep, we can't keep milking this argument for listens if you guys are going to discuss the issues in depth and come to some sort of solution. It's time to wrap it up and throw to a commercial. Thanks for listening to Talkie Talk. Next week we have an animal rights activist, Ernie Waterton, and a live bear.
I'm not done being an asshole.
Soapy Bubble Shampoo, the shampoo that refreshes you. Using our patented 19th century technology, it burns away that nasty dead skin and leaves you with a scalp that is pink, shiny, and free of dandruff. But don't take our word for it, listen to this testimonial. I used to be a slob with an itchy scalp and no vocational training until I tried soapy bubble shampoo. Now my shiny scalp gleams like a billiard ball, and I'm employed on Wall Street with other passive-aggressive jerks like me. Our patented formula includes hydrating hydrochloric acid, liquefied cow tendons for that extra energy kick, oatmeal for a nice shiny coat, and tobacco leaves for that smooth finish. These ingredients form a mystical bond that roots out nasty dead skin and drains harmlessly into the hippocampus, where it burns away feelings of compassion and human decency, leaving you an empty, emotionless husk, ready for employment. Try soapy bubble shampoo today and smell just like a modern working professional, you scumbag.
The ball peen hammer was invented in 1908 as a fancy party trick where Ball, its inventor, would smack his friends' hands with a hammer of his own design, and they would notice that there was less pain than if he had hit them with a regular hammer. Eventually this started to get on his friends' nerves, and they shut him out of all social occasion. Even though pain was one of the only joys the church would allow for settlers of the Americas. And indeed, punishment is still the only acceptable form of person-to-person contact allowed by the ruling caste. Despite all this, and after many long painful talks of a life of sin with his local pastor, Peen was more of a masochist than his era would allow, and his form of torture for himself was to double down on a bad investment, a house full of his invention, ball peen hammers. He sold them as a novelty, following in the footsteps of the other guy, Johnny Triangles. Oh, Johnny. He was the guy that invented the little mallet that the doctors use to check your kicks. When the little hammer was picked up at the parties Johnny went to and wielded as a cudgel, it effectively made the people feel like giant cavemen, and they would duel, and there was much flailing of limbs and ligaments as they struck various nerves in the body at the bleak, grey parties of the Victorian era. Neither hammer could really hold an axe to the actual real hammer or the wooden mallet they used to build with, for as long as people were making things, they would need various implements to wield at the fancy parties afterwards. The screwdriver was still yet to arrive, as it wasn't out of its early phase as a scraping jabber of earwax, and the story of its competitor, the invention of the Q-tip, was even then far too racy for polite conversation. Peen was an opioid enthusiast. He was often seen with a certain candy coating to his eyeballs, doing the ragaman as he stumbled down the roadways. He was in debt to every opium dealer in town, and soon he would have to sell his most prized possession, his opium pipe, or have to endure the great indignity of having his sternum caved in by one of his competitors' hammers. As he was on his way, walking along to the opium district, he tripped on his own stupidity, and one of his signature hammers fell out of his satchel and struck a common New England wastrel, the kind that was allowed his street corner because he was able to help keep the vermin population down. A predatory beast, allowed to exist by the local authorities as he helped control the population of doves and rats. Sadly, even now, society only cares about a person if they are somehow useful, and apparently in 1900s New England, turning a rat into a burger qualifies. The authority on the subject of rat burger hobo synthesis, Dr. Thatcher Graves, of course, was given a ticker tape parade, and a shiny new city planner position was afforded to him, and the department's budget was so high that any sort of income from the repair of the ecosystem was negated by Graves himself and his addiction to triangular party hammers. The wastrel's name was Mike. He was actually a bit of a collector of party hammers himself. He was more fond of the sledgehammer, which was the best home remedy to keep the night terrors out of one's head. He felt a sweeping nostalgia as the ball peen, which was no longer in circulation, now struck a small red mark in his kneecap. Peen was of course far too high to worry about an errant hammer, or to notice that a prototype of his invention had slipped away, the one with the little spherical nub on the back to massage your lover's feet with. Yes, the one we are all fond of today. Mike went on to patent the hammer with the only person he knew that had any money, Dr. Thatcher Graves. The two made an impressive fortune after taking it to a rather ruckus hammer party hosted by the CEO of the Vials of Bile Corporation, Gary Berry, where it was noted for its ability to gently smack corks into bottles and gently smack can lids shut and even rework metal, almost entirely on accident at the party. It is important to note that even after the ease of which the ball-peen hammer had increased production, the Vials of Bile Corporation eventually had to sell the mainstay of their holdings to Campbell's Soup. Ball-peen hadn't heard of any of this, as on the same day he met his lover Shelley Welly on his way to beg for mercy from his debtors in the opium district. After another trademark tumble on the cobblestone streets, Peen simultaneously reached out to grab his loose opium pipe at the exact same time that Shelley did. Their eyes met. She was rather weasel-like in her appearance, which was fine with Peen as he rather resembled an egret left alone in its nest. The two fell in love instantly after Peen stated the greatest pickup line of all time. "How do you get your eyes to twinkle like that? Is it the side effect of some kind of prescription medication?" "No," she replied. "It's the opium." At that point, the two of them fell out of the written annuals of history. However, they did sire an impressive opium-addicted baby that could guess its own weight, in flawless English, immediately after its birth. After that remarkable accomplishment, he was never able to live it down, and led a life of miserable existence, impregnating therapists and telling made-up stories that would never end. The various children of the therapist and the weight baby, now fully grown, had to deal with the deep misfortune of briefly being the funniest people in the world, as they had to share the spotlight with the others. One minute they would be on the radio, and later the telly, telling jokes about therapists, and the next they would be on the streets with cardboard signs around their neck that read, $20 and I'll make you laugh, $30 and I'll help you with your mental problems, $100 and I'll guess your weight. They were later beaten by other, stronger children because it was what they deserved. Dictated, not listened to, Gerald Finegrooves.